Hey, welcome to It's a Classic. My name is Tyler,
Hi, I'm Elizabeth.
and she is my mom, and we both love movies. When my family
We
likes a
do.
movie, we say it's a classic, even if it's not officially a classic. So join us, and we will talk about all the movies that we love and see why it's a classic. Well, to us it is.
To us.
All right, so today we are doing 2016's Assassin's Creed. This movie was directed by Justin Kurzel. Apologize if I had the pronunciation wrong. And the scoring for this movie was done by his brother. Fun fact. So
Interesting.
this movie's this movie came out in 2016, starring Michael Fassbender. He was the first choice by Ubisoft, the company that made the games Assassin's Creed, and this movie is based on all of the games, the Assassin's Creed games. So it'll be really fun.
Near and dear to my gaming heart.
I grew up playing the Assassin's Creed games, mostly 1 and 2, but they're some of my favorites. So this movie was really fun to watch.
Yes, it is a lot of fun. Fun fact people will learn about me is yes, I was a gamer at one point in my life. For an entire decade, I was a gamer. It was so much fun. And so, yeah, this movie came to me because of that. So I was really a lot of fun jumping back into this movie because I haven't seen it in a minute. So,
Yeah, yeah, I
uh,
really enjoyed it.
yes. So much. Okay, so I think what I'd like to do at this point, before we really deep dive into the movie, is let's talk about the Knights Templar. They
Okay.
are in this movie, obviously. So I just want to give some background on the Knights Templar so that people understand a little bit about that. So the Knights Templar are actually what it is people are called Templar members of the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. That is what their original title was. They're a religious military order of knighthood. And basically, if you look at it like if the pastors, because we do have clergymen in our military, imagine them as being also Navy SEALs most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be like their full-time job, and on the side they preach about Jesus. So. But these guys, the Knights Templar, they were started back in, let's see here, I've got the notes here. When did they started back in 1118, but what happened was in 1099, the Christians captured the city of Jerusalem back from the Muslims, and Christians would go on pilgrimage to the holy city, to Jerusalem. And during the time between, when the Christians took the Temple Mount back, they would be attacked on the roads there. They'd be attacked in the cities. And so this gentleman by the name of, he was a Frenchman, he was a knight by the name of, I'm not going to pronounce this very well, Hugh de Payens. And he created the military order with 8 of his relatives. So 8 of his family members created this, and what their job was to protect the people as they went on their pilgrimage, and also to protect Jerusalem itself. And so Baldwin II, who was the ruler of Jerusalem at that time, set up their headquarters on the Temple Mount. And in 1129, the Pope endorsed the temple, the Knights Templar, as the military might over Jerusalem, as the people that would be protecting the holy city of Jerusalem. So they were basically put into order by the Pope. So they were no joke. They weren't a fantasy created. This was an actual order, military order. So, because the Pope endorsed them, they had no authority except the Pope. So, imagine that power. And then they were also highly financed by the people that were going on these pilgrimages, and they had a very unique banking system set up. And so these, let's just say, wealthy people would from France would want to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They would deposit money into this very special bank, and that was run by the Knights Templar. And they didn't have to travel with any money, but when they got to the city, they could deposit, or they could take money out of the bank in Jerusalem. So that's how the banking system started. And they also owned, so they had the primary banking system in Europe at that time in 1100s. They had the primary banking system. They had their own fleet of ships, and they also owned the island of Cyprus. So interesting. They had a lot of money starting out from 8 people to that. Their duties were to protect travelers, to defend the Holy Land. They owned several castles in order to do that. The Holy Land's a big place. To come into the movie a little bit, they are known for their fierce fighting styles because they're very, very religious people. To go into that, they have a very strict code of conduct. They don't drink, they don't gamble, they don't swear. They have taken on an oath of poverty, of chastity, and of obedience. And so along with their duties, they're known for their fighting styles of they are forbidden to retreat. So if they go into battle, they are forbidden to retreat. They die defending the Holy Land. And then what happened was in 1291, so just 100 years later, less than 100 years later, there was a lot of battles going on in Jerusalem, and it was taken again by the Muslims in 1291 in the last fall of Acre, is what it's called. And then it looks like about 8 years later, King Philip of France. Well, in those 8 years after the fall, you got to imagine like it was a hard battle for these knights, right? To lose the city, and so after that happened, there was some talk about how much power they had and how much wealth they had. And it just so happened they had so much wealth. And if you remember any historical movies at all, there's always this thing going on in England and France and all that with money, and they make these big fleets of ships. They run out of money, and and all that stuff. So around this time, France, the king of France, was running out of money, and they wanted a loan from the Knights Templar, and the knights said, "Sorry, king, you're not getting a loan." And so I think the king was a little mad about that, and he decided to run with these ideas that they had too much money and power. And so in 1303, he vowed to destroy them because of that, and also I believe because the loan was denied. And so 5 years later, members of the Knights Templar, along with the Grand Master Morrill, I believe his name was, were arrested. And then 5 years later, the Pope was pressured by the King of France to dissolve the Knights Templar, and so he did. And then just 2 years later, the Grand Master de Morlaix was burned at the stake along with dozens of Knights of the Templar on Friday the 13th. And we will see some of this in the movie. So that is the backstory of the Knights Templar. And I just want to add one thing as we start to dive into this movie, that I find it very interesting that the Knights Templar are seen most historically as very good, courageous warrior men fighting for the cause of Christ But in this movie, it's like the assassins are the good guys, and their cause is like, like this movie's kind of romanticizing the villain. Just heads up on that. And in my opinion, the villain. So there you go. There's my take on the Knights.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, actually, this movie is based on a series of games by Ubisoft, and it's interesting in those timelines that you were talking about with the Crusades. Um, Assassin's Creed 1 is based in around 1190, and Assassin's Creed 2 is like 1470s to 1500. Yeah, this movie follows Anglar Dinera, and this movie takes place in, or at least the Strigo side of it takes place in 1492 Spain, and so that's kind of the timeline for it. So it's after the Crusades, but I believe they mentioned those in there.
Yeah, it's well after the Crusades if it's in the 1400s.
Yep. Yeah. So it's interesting that the first Assassin's Creed game that takes place in the Holy Land during the Crusades, and so they really went heavy on those.
It does make sense though, because they have the knights in this movie not at the forefront at all of the, you know what I mean? So if there were any remaining knights, because not all of the Knights Templar were burned at the stake, just a lot of them were. They were just dispersed. You know what I mean? So there could still have been men that were still devout to the cause, still practicing sort of thing. So I could see that. I could see that happening.
Yeah.
Especially with the Inquisition and that sort of thing happening. You've got devout Catholics,
This movie goes into a little bit more of the animus technology that they use, where they connect the kind of the DNA strands from our main character and have him go into his ancestor Angar.
So we go straight from what could potentially be a historic nonfiction movie just into fiction right away. It's fine though, because it's not based on any type of reality. There's no reality in this whatsoever. There's just a hint of history.
The Abstrigo company uses this technology because they're looking for this artifact that they know that Angalar had, and so they were able to track his bloodline and his DNA all the way to this man that's on death row, and they rescue him right away.
It has a very Highlander feel to it. That part of it. You know what I mean? Like the bloodline going like, yeah.
Yeah, really like how they transition between him hooked up in this room to this thing on his back. It follows all of his movements, and how they transition that to what we see the assassin doing in the 1490s, and just how that works.
That actually what I was thinking about, because, like when you watch a movie, you go into some thought. And I was thinking, like, in that moment that they hooked him up for the very first time, he must have been like, scared out of his mind. Like, he has no idea. They don't give him any inclination about what he's about to walk into. Like, they don't even prep him at all. They're just like, you know what? We're just going to hook you up because you're supposed to be dead anyway. And like, you seem to be having a rough day. Let's make it worse. I just thought that wasn't fair to him. They should have at least prepped him a little bit. Like, you're about to go into a mind warp that you're not going to understand. And you're going to see this possibly, like something, but they just hook him right up. And he takes it very well. I feel like he just handled it very well. Maybe that was his instinctual nature or something, but he was fine.
Yeah, they hook him up and they do this little countdown. He starts kind of seeing stuff, which already, just that would be like, wait, what's going on? And then all of a sudden he is just literally thrown forward into, hey, you're also this other guy 500 years ago.
Yeah, I love how this movie made that transition happen. It seemed plausible, you know.
Yeah, yeah, they did a really good job with it. It'll show, the assassin like running up a building and then jumping, and then it'll switch over to him in this room, and that thing's following him up while he's making all these movements to nothing, and it's just like,
Yeah.
man, that tracking is really cool. Yeah.
So the other thing I was thinking of, because I love that you brought that up, because in the moment when I was watching it, it reminded me so much of like the Oculus, you know what I mean? Or like the it reminds me of that virtual reality. I've always wondered how, if you're in a room and you're supposed to be running and, with this thing on, like, how do you do that in the room without like hitting the wall? And I can see how people would hit the wall. But in this movie, it really mirrors virtual reality before virtual reality was a thing. And they
Yep.
really did a great job in showing how like that could work. And it made it really
Yeah.
seamless in this movie, and I really enjoyed that. I really did. That was really great.
Yeah, I think some of the coolest scenes were like when he was fighting different people hooked up to, the animus.
Yeah.
He was making all of the different movements and fighting scenes, and you could see like shadows of the people he was fighting.
Yeah.
And even
Yeah.
like there's a part where he was holding a staff and he was swinging it and then switched hands, and just the way they did that, because they made the staff that kind of shadowy look, but you could see his hand
Yeah.
movements were tracking perfectly. I don't know, they must have had him obviously like doing the movements holding weapons, and like maybe they green screened the weapons out because it was like, seamless. It was really cool.
Yes, I agree with you. Very well done. Like, I really enjoyed those scenes. There was the one that I'm thinking of too, where he was like climbing a wall and he had to like grab like the part of the wall,
Mm-hmm.
and you could see him like grabbing that and then leaping over and grabbing the other thing, and you could just see the edge of the wall, but he was
Yeah,
hooked up to the machine at the same time. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. That was cool.
yeah. Well, and these actors did 95% of their own fight scenes. He spent a long time training.
More actors that are so dedicated to their crafts. No
Yeah,
wonder they're in
yeah,
amazing shape all the time. I mean, you know,
yeah.
that's impressive. That is impressive.
I love how accurate it all is. Because I mean, similar to our last episode of John Wick, it's accurate on screen because it was accurate in real life. They actually learned how to fight in general. But what's really cool
Right.
is that the storyline of it, because as you see towards the end of the film, like he's outside of the animus, but he's fighting, and so are these other different people that are part of this program. Um, and
Right.
it's very clear that they know these things because their mind and entire body have been in this simulation, and their DNA and memories and things, I think they call it like a bleed over, um, are connected with trained assassins.
Right. Yeah. And apparently it's not just from like 500 years ago, because that guy's mom was still involved in that. So it's not something that's just happened 500 years. It's still happening in the shadows. I also enjoy too that they, like I was saying before with the Knights Templar and the history implied there. There's also other places in this movie where they imply history, with Queen Isabella and King Fernando, a painting that they're looking at on the wall. I did read up on the painting, and I do have to tell you that a lot of the language was French, and I don't know French at all, so I'm going to slay this. In this room, there's some priceless art, and they're standing in front of this art piece. If you remember it, it's a piece of Isabella and Fernando sitting in their chairs with the Pope, and it's the Spanish Inquisition, very famous time in history. So this painting is by Francisco Rizzio, and it's titled, here we go, Auto de Fen en la Plaza Mayor de Madrid. So it's the Grand Inquisition in Madrid. It pictures Ferdinand and Isabel presiding over the execution of 3 assassins in Seville. But funny enough, the painting is not titled Seville, it's titled Madrid. But in the movie, they do this thing where they switch it around a little bit. The painting in the movie, there's a few things that are excluded from the painting, but they're small enough, but they're important enough. Like there's a coat of arms that's removed because it would actually signify the actual king and queen. And so this painting isn't the actual, they're talking about the actual picture, but the picture they're looking at isn't the actual picture because it's not Isabella and Ferdinand. It's 2 different people. It's not the 3 assassins. It's 3 different people. But when they hook him up, it takes him to this place, right? And it takes him to that place. And one of the things that you'll notice is that the one thing that's different is that it's not in the painting they show something different in the middle. In the reality, when you go back, that you're actually getting 3 people that are getting burned at the stake. 3 different people, right?
Yep.
But they're recreating the painting. But you see it actually happening in life. I found that part of the movie so incredibly cool. Like that they recreated this picture. Just like, that was awesome.
Yeah.
For me.
And what's really cool is, so the painting it's kind of painted mid Inferno, where you can tell that like it's in the middle of these assassins being burned. When it goes into the real side of it, in quotations, when he goes back, through the Animus, it shows a glimpse of that like painting from a real perspective, but the flames have died out and there's ash below the 3 pyres. So I like they do that because it's almost like, all right, you've seen the middle of it in the painting. Now we're going to show the end of it, and then the next set.
Yeah.
I
love what they did there. I love what they did there, and they kept we've talked about this before with like theatrical lighting and things like that, and they really did that in this scene as well. They kept the color of the painting in the scene.
Yep.
Like you saw these very dark colors, these very hued reds and things like, they just kept that in this whole scene. That was magnificent. Very well done. I like that.
Yeah. And in this, the execution and the whole running scene after the execution is my favorite sequence of the movie, because
that mirrors the game. That's also one of my favorite parts, because that is the game right there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the parkour throughout this movie is incredible. But yeah, the whole, like, them running on rooftops, them climbing up and down and fighting, all of those things are exact mirror to the games. And that's the best part of the game. It's so great.
And I have to tell you, that's exactly why them running across the flags is not corny, because you can do that in the game. You can do that in the game. So you never even think twice. You're like, oh, well, that's completely natural because I can do that in the game,
Right.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and then even in that sequence, they have one of the guys, falls into a wagon of hay, and it's a very quick. But in the game, it's how you hide bodies from when you assassinate them. You can throw them in hay so nobody sees them, and that's the bad guy was going into hay. And it's also how you break your fall when you're jumping from a building, is you jump into a pile of hay. So I like that they put it in there because it's such a quick moment, but the people who played the game are going to be like, oh, oh, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. They kept it true to the integrity of the game because people at the time, in this time, I mean, I am one of them, that when this movie came out, everybody was just like, you know, and at that
yeah,
time, like integrity of a movie matching the game, that's a big deal because there's a lot of gamers out there and they'll catch it.
yeah, yeah. And then the other game aspect that they brought into this that I really liked was following the eagle throughout. And
Yes, that's an important
what's
part of the movie,
interesting,
though. That's they said that in the beginning, though. It's an important part of the creed.
um, Angelar is Latin for eagle, and that's his
Oh,
name.
okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, what I
I
liked
like
with
that.
that is that throughout the game you had eagle vision, um, which of course that's how you saw around the map. But then when you do a leap of faith in the game, you have this eagle around you, and um, I like that they stay true to that. With the leap of faith, they did one of these in this movie, and this movie, um, with that shot, was the highest and longest free fall ever filmed, and it was over 125 feet of a stunt actor in free fall. Fell into one of those big inflatable things. Um, yeah,
So yeah, I want to also know because I've been kind of struggling with this part of the movie, and I'm really interested on what your take is of the apple of Eden and the protection of free will. Why are we protecting free will? That's a gift. You know what I mean? So I'm interested
right.
in that because that really has a lot to do with what I felt was this making the good guy the bad guy and the bad guy the good guy, like that turn of events. And I really feel like this free will thing has a lot to do with like that whole idea of it. So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Well, okay, there must be more. I feel like one of the things that was missing in the movie is the backstory of the real world issue of assassins. Obviously, at the beginning, we see that his mom was killed by an assassin, which ended up being his dad. And
Right.
we hear about another woman who was killed by an assassin. Like, oh, it touches a little bit on it, but
But the purpose of the assassins is they're trying to uh, protect this apple because they don't want the Templars to get it, and the assassins all know where it is, and if you give it up, you're the traitor, sort of thing. And so, but I'm just trying to understand, like they said, like with this apple, they can wipe out free will and start the planet over again as it was intended by God. So free will wasn't a thing, right? It was just, well, it was a thing because we did have free will in the very beginning. It was always there. So I'm trying to
and
understand that.
what they say in this is that holds the seed of man's deception or fall or sin.
From the tree of the good and evil, as
Right,
that's the seed.
right.
Why would you want
So
that?
it's also a metal ball. So I don't know if that is in like that's holding a physical seed. I don't know. They
It
don't go into it because when he opened it, it was just green light. So I don't. It doesn't make sense.
it wasn't an apple seed, or I don't know what it means.
Yeah,
But the other thing that they also said was that they're outside of the law. God gave us the laws, right? And so they're
yeah,
saying like the assassins are outside of that because they're trying to stop the knights from taking away our free will, which is the seed. Which I don't know, like you say it's all this metaphor stuff too, and I'm just trying to like wrap my head around. But I agree with
yeah.
you though. They if they throw something out there like that, it's such a big deal that the whole movie's wrapped around it. You should at least give it a storyline of some sort of
Right,
an explanation, a better explanation as to what they're fighting so hard to protect.
right.
Why?
Show us that. Show us that assassin, because one of the things he says in his little keynote thing, um, at the end, assassins have been a problem and we need to end this problem and whatever. But it doesn't show that assassins are a problem. Like, it doesn't, I don't know. They could have gone more into that. Another thing that I want to mention here, because it's a slight difference between the game and the movie, but it's shown right at the beginning. Um, so when Angelar accepts the creed of an assassin, he gets
Yes.
the ring finger is cut off for his hidden blade to be installed, so that when the blade comes up, it doesn't impede on his hand, right?
Correct. Yeah.
But the difference is that in the games, I think all fingers were cut off. Like, I think it was just like they would do this and the thing would come out. So anyway, it's a little thing. It's a little difference between the game and the movie, but still very well done.
Very well done. I'm very impressed and happy with the outcome. I watch it
Yeah,
again. I give this movie a 2 thumbs up.
yeah, it's a good movie. I really like it. Michael Fassbender said afterwards that if he could go back and change anything, he would make it more entertaining, and that he thought it was a little bit too serious. I disagree personally. I'm not,
I
because he was
disagree
part of like
too.
the editing. I
Yeah.
think it was great. It was very entertaining.
I also want to point out one quick thing that I did remember while I was watching this was that something we talked about in the John Wick movie that didn't need to have humor in it. This movie also doesn't need to have humor in it, but they put humor in it. But they put it in a very good place. It was appropriate humor. It wasn't too over the top, and it was understandable. Like it flowed well in the movie. You know what I mean? So there was a hint of humor in this movie, but not enough to make it stupid and corny, so I was okay with it.
All right, so yeah, thank you guys for joining us for It's a Classic,
Yeah.
for the 2016's Assassin's Creed. Thank you guys so much for joining. We look forward to our next movie, which I believe is Dante's Peak. So you guys have that to look forward to. It'll be really good.
Thank you for having me, Tyler. Just watch the movie, like and subscribe.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you all so much for listening to It's a Classic. If you like it and want to hear more, please follow us on Instagram and YouTube at It's a Classic Film Podcast. You can also rate us on Spotify, which really helps. So join us while we discuss our next movie and see why we think it's a classic. Well, for us it is.